The deafening crack of a gavel echoed through the dusty square of Lordsburg, New Mexico territory. As Prudence Everton's tear-streaked face lifted toward the setting sun, its dying rays casting her features in a haunting amber glow that matched the shackles binding her wrists. April 1882. The dry desert wind carried the scent of sage and gunpowder through the crowd gathered for the auction. Men's hats tipped low to shield their faces from both the glare and their own shame. Prudence, 20 years old with hair the color of wheat and eyes like storm clouds, stood trembling on the makeshift wooden platform. Just 3 days earlier, she had been the respected daughter of a shopkeeper. Now, with her father dead from a bandit's bullet and his debts called due, she faced the ultimate indignity. $500 for the girl, called a heavyset man with tobacco-stained teeth, his eyes roving over her form with unconcealed hunger. 600, countered another, a cattle baron whose reputation for cruelty stretched across 3 territories. Prudence closed her eyes, willing herself not to collapse. This couldn't be happening, not in America, not in 1882. But the frontier had its own brutal laws, and the corrupt sheriff who'd arranged this debt settlement knew no one would challenge his authority. $800, came a new voice, quiet yet commanding, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Prudence's eyes snapped open to see a tall figure at the back of the gathering. Unlike the others, he stood straight, his features partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could make out the sharp line of his jaw and the resolute set of his shoulders beneath a worn leather duster. The auctioneer, a rat-faced man with darting eyes, licked his lips nervously. 800 from the stranger. Do I hear 9? The cattle baron spat into the dirt. 900. 1,000, countered the stranger without hesitation, stepping forward. The crowd parted, revealing a man perhaps 7 or 8 years her senior. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, a 6-shooter holstered low on his hip. But it was his eyes that caught Prudence's attention, deep blue and intense, meeting hers with something unexpected: compassion. Sold, declared the auctioneer as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Sold at sunset to Mr. Xavier Prescott, the stranger supplied, approaching the platform with measured steps. He counted out bills from a leather pouch, handing them to the auctioneer before turning to Prudence. As the keys to her shackles were handed over, Prudence felt a fresh wave of tears threatening. From one owner to another, that's all this was. The crowd began to disperse, some casting sympathetic glances her way, others leering, but none intervening. Xavier Prescott unlocked her restraints himself, his touch impersonal yet somehow gentle. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "By dawn you'll see freedom's light," he murmured. "You have my word." Prudence stared at him, hope and suspicion warring within her. "Why should I believe you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because I give you my word as a man who despises what happened here today." He offered his arm formally, as though escorting her to a dance rather than claiming purchased property. "Come. We should leave before the sheriff changes his mind about the sale." With no choice but to trust this stranger or face worse alternatives, Prudence placed her trembling hand on his forearm. As they walked away from the auction platform, townsfolk turned their faces away in shame or curiosity. Only the sheriff watched them with narrow, calculating eyes. Xavier led her to where 2 horses waited, a handsome chestnut gelding and a smaller paint mare. "Can you ride?" he asked. Prudence nodded. Her father had insisted she learn, saying no daughter of his would depend on a man's convenience for transportation. "Good," Xavier said, helping her mount the paint before swinging into his own saddle. "We'll ride until full dark, then make camp." They left Lordsburg behind, hoofbeats fading into the desert night. Prudence sat stiff-backed on her horse, dignity the only possession remaining to her. The cool night air raised gooseflesh on her arms beneath the thin calico dress, the last one her father had bought her for her birthday. Her father. The thought brought fresh grief. William Everton had been a good man, strict but fair, raising her alone after her mother died of fever when Prudence was just 11. He taught her to read and cipher, to shoot straight and ride well, preparing her for a life beyond the confines of Lordsburg. Never could he have imagined she'd end up sold like cattle to pay the debts that accrued after drought drove their store to bankruptcy. They rode in silence for nearly an hour before Xavier finally spoke. "Are you hungry, Miss Everton?" The use of her proper name, the small courtesy it represented, nearly undid her. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "I've been in town 3 days." "Long enough to hear about William Everton's daughter and what Sheriff Clayton planned for you." His jaw tightened. "Long enough to know that what happened wasn't legal, even by territorial standards. Yet you participated in it," she said bitterly, "to get you out." He glanced at her, moonlight catching his profile. "Would you have preferred I left you to Barton's ranch? The man works his hands to death and treats women worse, the cattle baron." Prudence shuddered involuntarily. "No, I thought not." Xavier slowed his horse, scanning the terrain. "There's a creek ahead. We'll stop there." The spot he chose was sheltered by cottonwoods, the burbling creek providing cover for any sounds they might make. Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, then moved to help her down. Prudence hesitated before accepting his assistance, her body stiff with tension as his hands spanned her waist. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly, setting her on her feet and immediately stepping back. "You have my word on that as well." He busied himself unloading saddlebags and preparing a small fire, giving her space that felt both considerate and calculated. Prudence watched him warily, taking stock of her situation. She had no money, no weapon, and no idea where they were beyond east of Lordsburg. If she ran, where would she go? And if this man meant her harm, why bother with this charade? Xavier produced jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of water, offering her a share without comment. The food was plain but filling, and Prudence realized she hadn't eaten since the previous night. "Thank you," she said stiffly when she'd finished. Xavier nodded, adding small branches to their fire. "You should rest. We've got a long ride tomorrow." "Where are you taking me?" He looked up, firelight playing across features that were handsome in a weathered way, not soft like a city gentleman's, but carved by sun and wind and experience. "First, away from anyone who might recognize you. Then to Santa Fe, where I have friends who can help get you papers and passage east if that's what you want." Prudence stared at him. "You're serious about letting me go? I told you by dawn you'll see freedom's light. I meant it." He set aside the stick he'd been using to tend the fire. "I bought your freedom, Miss Everton, not you." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you spend $1,000 to free a stranger?" Xavier was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. "Because 5 years ago, someone did the same for my sister after rustlers killed our parents and the local ranchers decided she'd cover our debts." His eyes met hers across the fire. "She lives in Boston now, married, has 2 children." The simple story shifted something in Prudence's understanding of him. Not a savior or a saint, but a man repaying a debt to fate. "I see," she said softly. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott." "Xavier," he corrected. "Out here, formalities just mark class divisions we do better to forget." Prudence nodded slowly. "Then you should call me Prudence," he offered a small smile. "Get some sleep, Prudence. I'll keep watch." She curled up in the blanket he provided, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Xavier Prescott's silhouette against the star-filled sky, solid and watchful in the vast, empty landscape. Morning came with pale pink light and the smell of coffee. Prudence woke disoriented, memories flooding back as she saw Xavier crouched by a small fire, pouring dark liquid into a tin cup. "You're awake," he observed. "Coffee." Prudence sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could. "Yes, please." She accepted the cup, its warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "You let me sleep past dawn," she noted, looking at the brightening sky. "You needed rest." He handed her a strip of jerky. "Eat something. We should move soon." As they broke camp and prepared to ride, Prudence found herself studying him with new eyes. In daylight, Xavier Prescott looked less mysterious, a man in his late 20s with sun-browned skin, straight dark hair that brushed his collar, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to self-reliance, checking both horses with practiced hands. "How far to Santa Fe?" she asked as he helped her mount. "4 days hard riding if we're lucky." He swung into his saddle. "But first we need to throw off any pursuit." "Pursuit? You think they'll come after us?" Xavier's expression darkened. "Sheriff Clayton took a hefty cut of that auction money, and I've been asking questions around town that might have made him nervous. Better safe than sorry." They rode east at first, following the creek, then cut north across rough country. Xavier set a challenging pace, but the paint mare proved sure-footed and responsive. By midday, they'd put significant distance between themselves and Lordsburg. During a brief rest to water the horses, Prudence gathered her courage. "May I ask what you do, Xavier? You're not dressed like a cowhand, but you ride like someone who lives in the saddle." A guarded look crossed his face. "I was a cavalry scout during the Apache campaigns. These days I do odd jobs, guide parties through difficult country, sometimes track people who don't want to be found." "A bounty hunter?" she asked, alarmed. "No," he said firmly. "I don't bring people back against their will. Sometimes a worried father wants to know his daughter reached California safely. Sometimes a widow needs to find the partner who absconded with her husband's money." He shrugged. "I find people, deliver messages, then move on. And who are these friends in Santa Fe who can help me?" "A couple who run a hotel. Thomas was a Union officer during the war. His wife Rachel teaches at a school for girls. They help people start fresh without too many questions." They continued northward through increasingly rugged terrain. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, and Xavier frowned at the sky. "Storm coming. We'll need shelter." An hour later, fat raindrops began to fall as they approached a ramshackle line cabin, a simple one-room structure used by cowboys during seasonal cattle drives. "It's not much," Xavier said, dismounting quickly to open the weathered door, "but it'll keep us dry." Inside was sparse but serviceable: a small iron stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk built into one wall. Xavier brought in their supplies while Prudence stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how intimate these close quarters would be. Reading her discomfort, Xavier nodded toward the bunk. "That's yours. I'll sleep by the door." The rain intensified, drumming on the roof as Xavier built a fire in the stove and hung their damp outer clothes to dry. He moved with practiced efficiency, respecting her space while transforming the cold cabin into something almost cozy. Prudence watched him, questions multiplying. "You said your sister lives in Boston now. Do you visit her?" Xavier stilled momentarily before continuing to slice strips of salt pork for their supper. "No, better for her to leave the past behind completely." "She doesn't even know you're alive." Prudence couldn't hide her shock. "She knows. We exchange letters through the friends in Santa Fe." He glanced up, something vulnerable briefly visible in his expression. Some ghosts are best kept at a distance. And you? Are you a ghost, Xavier Prescott? The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. Perhaps I am. He turned back to cooking, closing the door on further personal revelations. But that brief glimpse of the man beneath the careful exterior stayed with Prudence, turning in her mind as they shared a simple meal of fried pork and beans. As night fell and the rain continued, Xavier unrolled his bedroll near the door as promised. Prudence settled onto the bunk, exhaustion tugging at her despite the strange circumstances. Just before sleep claimed her, she heard Xavier's voice, soft in the darkness. "Rest easy, Prudence. You're safe here." For reasons she couldn't fully explain, she believed him. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, trapping them in the cabin. Xavier used the time to clean his revolver and sharpen his knife while Prudence stared out the small window at the rain-lashed landscape, restlessness building with each passing hour. "There are some books in my saddlebag if you're bored," Xavier offered, noticing her fidgeting. "Nothing fancy, just some dime novels and a volume of Whitman." Prudence raised an eyebrow. "Walt Whitman? I wouldn't have taken you for a poetry man." A flush colored his cheekbones. "There's more to life than tracking and shooting, Miss Everton." The formality signaled she'd offended him. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to sound condescending." Xavier shrugged, but his posture remained stiff. "Most people see a gun and a dusty coat and think they know all there is to know." His words struck uncomfortably close to home. Hadn't she been guilty of exactly that kind of judgment? "My father loved Emerson," she offered as a peace gesture. "He used to read essays aloud on winter evenings. Said a man's mind needed cultivating same as any field." Xavier's expression softened. "Sounds like a wise man." He was. Grief tightened her throat. He didn't deserve to die defending a few dollars in a till. "Few men get the death they deserve," Xavier said quietly, "good or bad." The simple truth of this hung between them as the rain continued to fall. Eventually, Prudence accepted his offer of books, settling with Whitman while Xavier returned to maintaining his gear. The afternoon passed in companionable silence broken only by the patter of rain, an occasional turning of pages. By evening, the storm had begun to ease. They shared another simple meal, and afterward Xavier surprised her by producing a deck of cards. "Poker," he suggested. "Just to pass the time." Prudence smiled for the first time since leaving Lordsburg. "My father taught me to play. He said a lady should know how to recognize a bluff." Xavier's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Smart man. What shall we wager, since neither of us has much to spare?" "Stories," Prudence decided impulsively. "Winner asks a question, loser must answer truthfully." A shadow of wariness crossed his face, but he nodded. "Fair enough." They played by lantern light, and Prudence quickly discovered Xavier had an excellent poker face. After losing the first hand, she answered his simple question about where she'd learned to ride. The second hand went her way, and she asked about his time with the cavalry. 3 years with the 5th Cavalry out of Fort Bowie, he answered, shuffling for the next hand. Mostly tracking raiding parties and guiding supply trains. Left in '79 when they started forcing the peaceful bands onto reservations. You disagreed with the policy. That's a second question, he pointed out with a faint smile. You'll have to win again. 3 hands later she did and returned to the topic. You left the cavalry because of how they treated the Apache. Xavier studied his cards. Partly. I'd made friends among them during parlays. Good men who wanted peace but couldn't watch their children starve on government rations. He set down his cards. And partly because I'd seen enough death. The war didn't end in '65, it just moved west and changed enemies. The depth of feeling in his voice surprised her. This was no simple cowboy or scout, but a man who had witnessed history's brutal march and made his own judgments. "Your turn," she said softly. Xavier won the next hand. His blue eyes met hers over his cards, and for a moment she thought he might ask something trivial. Instead he asked, "What will you do if you reach the East? Do you have family there?" "My mother's sister lives in Philadelphia," Prudence replied. "I've never met her, but father corresponded with her occasionally." She twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. "Beyond that, I don't know. Fine work, I suppose. I can read and write well enough to be a shop girl or perhaps a teacher's assistant." "You could marry," Xavier suggested neutrally. Prudence's chin lifted. "I won't marry for security, if that's what you mean. My father always said I should marry for love or not at all." She looked down at her worn dress. "Though I suppose beggars can't be choosers." "You're not a beggar," Xavier said sharply, "and any man worth having would see your worth beyond circumstances." The vehemence in his tone caught her off guard. Their eyes met across the table, something unspoken passing between them before Xavier cleared his throat and gathered the cards. "It's late," he said. "We should rest. The trail will be muddy tomorrow." That night, Prudence lay awake long after Xavier's breathing had deepened into sleep. His words echoed in her mind, along with the brief flash of something she'd seen in his eyes, something that looked dangerously like admiration. Morning broke clear and crisp. The storm washed away to leave a landscape transformed. They set out early, pushing the horses as much as the muddy ground would allow. By midday, they reached higher elevation where pine trees replaced scrub brush, the air noticeably cooler. "We'll follow this ridge," Xavier explained. "Better to stay high where we can see anyone following." "Do you really think the sheriff would come after us?" Prudence asked, scanning the vast, empty country behind them. "Clayton's the kind of man who hates losing face, and $1,000 is motivation enough." Xavier adjusted his hat against the sun. "Best to be cautious." They made good time despite the terrain, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By late afternoon, they'd reached a promontory overlooking a sweeping valley. Xavier reined in, gesturing for Prudence to join him at the edge. "Look there," he said, pointing northwest. "See that dark line? That's the trail to Santa Fe. 2 more days riding and you'll be closer to freedom." Prudence studied the distant landscape, a strange mixture of hope and something like regret stirring in her chest. 2 more days, and this odd interlude with Xavier Prescott would end. She would continue east, and he would return to his solitary life of tracking and drifting. The thought left an unexpected hollow feeling. "What is it?" Xavier asked, noticing her expression. Prudence shook her head. "Just thinking about what comes next. 1 step at a time," he advised. "First Santa Fe, then decisions." They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, the horses grazing on fresh grass while Xavier built a fire. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Prudence huddled closer to the flames, wishing for a heavier shawl than the thin one she'd been wearing when taken from her home. Without comment, Xavier removed his leather duster and placed it around her shoulders. The garment was heavy and still warm from his body. "I can't take your coat," she protested. "You'll freeze." "I've got a blanket," he said, already unrolling his bedding. "Keep it. The nights get cold up here." His simple kindness, offered without expectation or comment, touched something deep within her. Since her father's death, every man she'd encountered had wanted something: her body, her servitude, her dignity. Even the few who'd looked sympathetic during the auction had done nothing to stop it. But this man had given everything: money, protection, respect, and asked nothing in return except that she trust him to deliver on his promise of freedom. "Why are you really doing this, Xavier?" she asked, pulling the duster tighter around her shoulders. He looked up from the fire, his face half in shadow. I told you, someone did the same for my sister. That explains the rescue, not. She gestured vaguely between them. This, the care you're taking, you could have handed me off to some stagecoach or put me on a train. Instead, you're personally escorting me hundreds of miles through dangerous country. Xavier was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. When I found my sister after the attack, she was. He swallowed hard. She wasn't the same. The men who helped her get east treated her like damaged goods, something to be pitied and handled with gloves. It took her years to feel human again. His eyes met Prudence's across the fire. You deserve better than that. You deserve to be treated with dignity, not as a victim or a charity case. The raw honesty in his voice made her throat tight. Thank you for that, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned away to tend the horses, giving her space to compose herself. That night, wrapped in his duster, Prudence slept more soundly than she had since her father's death. The scent of leather and pine and something distinctly Xavier surrounding her like a cocoon. The next day brought them deeper into mountain country. Xavier set a more cautious pace, frequently stopping to scan their back trail or study tracks crossing their path. Worried? Prudence asked during one such stop. Xavier frowned at a set of hoofprints. 3 riders passed here this morning, heading the same direction we are. That doesn't mean they're following us. This is a common route, isn't it? Common enough, he remounted, eyes still scanning the terrain. But better alert than ambushed. His caution proved justified late that afternoon. As they rounded a bend in the trail where it narrowed between 2 rocky outcroppings, Xavier suddenly raised his hand in warning. Before Prudence could ask why, he'd swung down from his saddle and moved to help her dismount. 3 riders ahead, he murmured, leading both horses off the trail into a stand of pines. Stay here with the horses. Don't make a sound. He drew his revolver and moved silently toward the edge of the trees, crouching behind a boulder that offered a view of the trail ahead. Prudence held the horse's reins, heart pounding as she strained to hear what Xavier might be seeing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before Xavier finally returned, his expression grim. "Bounty hunters," he said quietly. "I recognized Harris Dalton. He works out of Silver City. Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as venomous. Looking for us. They've got a description matching you." Xavier's jaw tightened. Clayton must have sent word ahead. Cold fear washed through her. What do we do? Change of plans. Xavier quickly checked his saddlebags. There's a hunting cabin about 5 miles east of here. An old friend owns it. He won't mind us borrowing it. We'll wait there until the bounty hunters move on, then find another route to Santa Fe. They led the horses through the forest, staying well off the trail. The going was slow and difficult, requiring them to dismount frequently to navigate fallen logs or rocky streams. By the time they reached the cabin, a sturdy structure of logs and stone tucked against a cliff face, twilight was deepening into night. "Stay alert while I check inside," Xavier instructed, drawing his revolver again. He approached the cabin cautiously, testing the door before disappearing inside. Moments later, he emerged and waved her forward. "It's clear." The cabin was larger than the lined shack they'd sheltered in during the storm, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom visible through an open door, and a lean-to kitchen area. Everything was dusty but sound. "Your friend won't mind us staying here?" Prudence asked, looking around. "Jim died 2 years ago," Xavier replied, lighting a lamp he'd found. "His nephew inherited everything but never comes up here. We should be safe." He moved efficiently, checking supplies and securing the cabin while Prudence stood uncertainly in the center of the room. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were truly being hunted, and this man was risking his life to protect her. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "I've brought nothing but trouble to you." Xavier paused in his work, looking at her with genuine surprise. "This isn't your fault, Prudence. But if you hadn't helped me, then you'd be suffering a fate worse than death at Barton's ranch, and I'd be drinking myself numb trying to forget I'd stood by and let it happen." His voice was firm. "I made my choice. I don't regret it." The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. How long had it been since anyone had chosen her welfare over their own? Since her father died, certainly, but even before that had anyone ever put her first? "Thank you," she said simply. Inadequate words for the debt she owed him. Xavier nodded once, then continued preparing the cabin. They ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, neither wanting to risk a fire that might be seen from a distance. As night deepened, Xavier insisted Prudence take the bedroom while he kept watch from the main room. "You need rest too," she protested. "I'll sleep lightly," he assured her. Old cavalry habit, one eye open. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Prudence. Through the half-open door, she could see Xavier's silhouette as he moved quietly around the cabin, checking windows and the door latch before settling into a chair positioned to view both entrances. In the faint moonlight filtering through the shutters, his profile looked carved from stone, strong and vigilant. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke with a start to the sound of Xavier's voice, low and urgent. "Prudence, wake up, someone's coming." She was instantly alert, heart pounding as she joined him at the window. Through a gap in the shutters, she could make out 3 mounted figures approaching slowly in the pre-dawn light. "How did they find us?" she whispered. "Tracks, probably. Dalton was always a good tracker." Xavier's expression was grim as he checked his revolver. "There's a back way out through the kitchen. When I create a distraction, you take my horse and ride northeast. There's a mission settlement about 15 miles that way. Ask for Father Ignacio and tell him Xavier sent you." Horror washed through her. "I'm not leaving you to face 3 gunmen alone." "This isn't a debate," he said firmly. "I promised you freedom, and I mean to keep that promise." Before she could argue further, one of the riders called out, "We know you're in there, Prescott. Send out the Everton girl, and maybe we won't kill you." Xavier's mouth tightened. "So much for hoping they didn't know who I was." He moved to the door, positioning himself to the side. "Go to the kitchen and be ready to run when I say." "No," Prudence said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't be the cause of your death." "Damn it, woman, my father taught me to shoot," she interrupted. "And there's 2 guns in this cabin. Give me your spare and we stand a better chance." Xavier stared at her, conflict evident in his expression. Outside, another call rang out. "You've got 1 minute, Prescott, then we start shooting, please," Prudence said. "I can help." After a heartbeat's hesitation, Xavier nodded sharply. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a smaller revolver, checking it quickly before handing it to her. "Stay low and behind cover," he instructed. "Aim for center mass, not limbs, and don't hesitate once you've decided to shoot." His eyes held hers intently. "Can you do that?" Prudence took the gun, its weight both terrifying and reassuring. "Yes." Xavier positioned her behind an overturned table, then took up his own position near the window. "On my signal," he said quietly. The minute elapsed in tense silence. Then, without warning, a shot shattered one of the shuttered windows. Glass sprayed across the floor as Xavier ducked, then returned fire in one smooth motion. Outside, a man cursed. "I hit someone," Xavier muttered. "But they're taking cover behind the rocks." Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets thudding into the cabin walls. Prudence pressed herself against the floor, fear threatening to paralyze her until Xavier's calm voice cut through the chaos. "Steady," he said. "Wait for a clear shot." When it came a bounty hunter darting between boulders, Prudence raised her revolver and fired. The recoil jarred her arm, and she had no idea if she'd hit anything, but the simple act of fighting back rather than cowering gave her strength. The exchange of gunfire continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then came a lull, followed by a voice different from the first. "Prescott, let's talk terms." Xavier's face was streaked with sweat and gunpowder residue, but his voice remained steady. "Nothing to talk about, Dalton. There's a $1,000 bounty on the girl," the man called back. "Let's split it 500 each. You walk away clean and we take her back to Clayton." "Not happening," Xavier shouted. To Prudence he whispered, "They're trying to flank us." The back door, before he could finish, the door to the lean-to kitchen splintered under a powerful kick. Xavier spun, firing twice in rapid succession. A man screamed, the sound abruptly cut short by a third shot. "Carlos is dead." One of the remaining bounty hunters yelled, genuine fear in his voice. "Dalton, he killed Carlos." Prudence stared at Xavier, who had already returned his attention to the front of the cabin, his expression unchanged despite having just taken a life. This was a side of him she hadn't seen: the cavalry scout who had survived Apache wars and frontier justice, who could kill without hesitation when necessary. "Last chance, Prescott," Dalton called. "The girl's not worth dying for." Xavier's eyes met Prudence's across the room, something fierce and uncompromising in his gaze. "Yes, she is," he answered, loud enough for the bounty hunters to hear. The simple declaration hung in the air, stunning Prudence as much as their attackers. Before anyone could respond, Xavier fired 3 rapid shots through the front window, then darted to her side. "They're pulling back," he said urgently. "This is our chance. There's a trail behind the cabin that leads up to the ridge. If we can reach it, we've got a fighting chance. The horses, no time. We'll go on foot until we lose them." He checked her revolver, adding rounds from his own supply. "Stay close to me." "Ready," Prudence nodded, adrenaline making her limbs tremble but her mind strangely clear. This man was willing to die for her freedom. The least she could do was fight alongside him. They slipped out through the shattered back door, Xavier leading the way into the dense forest that climbed the ridge behind the cabin. They moved as silently as possible, using trees and boulders for cover as they ascended. Behind them, angry shouts indicated the bounty hunters had discovered their escape. Gunshots rang out, but they were firing blindly into the forest. "Keep moving," Xavier urged when Prudence stumbled on the steep terrain. "Just a little further to the ridgeline." Her lungs burned with exertion, and her dress caught on brambles, tearing in several places. But fear and determination drove her forward, following Xavier's sure-footed path through the wilderness. They reached the ridge as dawn broke, the first golden rays illuminating the valley below. Xavier pulled her down behind a fallen log, both of them gasping for breath as they peered back the way they'd come. "2 of them still following," Xavier observed grimly. "Dalton won't give up easily." "What do we do now?" Prudence asked. Xavier studied the terrain ahead. "There's an old mining trail along this ridge. If we can reach it, it'll take us toward the mission." He looked at her torn dress and exhausted face. "Can you keep going?" Prudence straightened her shoulders. "Yes." They continued along the ridge, moving as quickly as the rocky ground allowed. The sun rose higher, its heat intensifying as morning progressed. Xavier shared his canteen sparingly, both aware that water would become their most pressing concern if the pursuit lasted much longer. By midday, they'd put significant distance between themselves and their pursuers, but Prudence's strength was flagging. Her city boots, never designed for mountain hiking, had rubbed blisters on her heels, and her breath came in painful gasps. Xavier found a small hollow sheltered by boulders. "Rest here for a few minutes," he said, helping her sit. "I'll scout ahead." As he moved away, Prudence leaned her head back against the cool stone, closing her eyes. The events of the past days swirled in her mind like a dust devil: her father's death, the auction, Xavier's unexpected intervention, and now this desperate flight. How had her life changed so completely in less than a week? And how had her feelings for Xavier Prescott transformed from wary gratitude to something deeper and more complicated? His words from the cabin echoed in her mind. Yes, she is worth dying for. No one had ever valued her so highly. Xavier returned, his expression worried. "They've split up. One's still following our trail, the other's trying to circle ahead. Can we outrun them? Not on foot, not with you injured." He glanced at her bleeding feet, then made a decision. "There's a steep ravine about half a mile ahead. We can use it for cover, maybe set an ambush." They pressed on, Prudence gritting her teeth against the pain. When they reached the ravine, Xavier helped her climb down its steep side to a narrow ledge that offered both concealment and a defensive position. "Stay here," he instructed, pressing his spare revolver into her hand again. "If anyone comes who isn't me, shoot first and ask questions later." "Where are you going?" Alarm sharpened her voice. "To end this," he said simply. "We can't keep running forever." Before she could protest, he had scaled the ravine wall and disappeared from sight. Prudence huddled against the rock face, gun clutched in both hands, listening intently for any sound above the pounding of her own heart. Time stretched unbearably. The sun moved across the sky, shadows shifting as minutes turned to an hour. Then another. Had Xavier been killed? Was he lying wounded somewhere while she hid uselessly in this ravine, just as she'd resolved to climb out and search for him? A shower of small stones announced someone's approach from above. Prudence raised the revolver, finger tensing on the trigger. "It's me," came Xavier's voice, quiet but clear. "Don't shoot." He appeared at the edge of the ravine, face grimy and a fresh cut across one cheekbone, but otherwise intact. Relief flooded through Prudence so strongly she nearly dropped the gun. "What happened?" she asked as he carefully made his way down to her ledge. "Dalton won't be following us anymore," he said grimly. The other one, Malone, decided a dead partner, and $250 wasn't worth his life. He's riding back to Silver City. The flat finality in his tone told Prudence everything she needed to know. More death, more violence, all because of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears suddenly threatening. "This is all because of me. If I hadn't, stop." Xavier's hands gripped her shoulders firmly. Dalton was a killer many times over. He made his choice when he decided a bounty was worth more than human dignity. His blue eyes bored into hers. "None of this is your fault, Prudence. None of it." The conviction in his voice broke something inside her. The tight control she'd maintained since her father's death crumbled, and she collapsed against his chest, sobs tearing from her throat. Xavier's arms came around her hesitantly, then more securely as her tears soaked his shirt. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "Let it out. You're safe now." She cried for her father, for her lost home, for the innocence shattered by the auction block. She cried for the men who had died, for Xavier's wounded sister, for all the broken pieces of a world that allowed such cruelties. And finally, she cried for the confusing tangle of feelings growing inside her, for this complicated, honorable man who had risked everything for a stranger. When her tears finally subsided, Prudence became acutely aware of Xavier's arm still around her, of her cheek pressed against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. She should pull away, propriety demanded it. But she couldn't bring herself to break the first real human connection she'd felt since her world collapsed. "We should go," Xavier said softly, making no move to release her. The mission's still several hours' walk. Prudence nodded against his chest before reluctantly straightening. Xavier's hands lingered on her shoulders for a moment before falling away, his eyes searching her face with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Can you walk?" he asked, glancing at her feet. "I'll manage," she said with determination she didn't entirely feel. Xavier frowned, then turned his back to her, crouching slightly. "Climb on." "What? No, I couldn't possibly, Prudence." Her name on his lips held both exasperation and affection. "Your feet are torn to shreds, we have miles to go, and there's no one here to scandalize. Please, let me help you." Put that way, her objection seemed foolish. Gingerly, she placed her hands on his shoulders and allowed him to hoist her onto his back, her arms circling his neck as his hands gripped her thighs to keep her in place. "All right?" he asked. "Yes," she managed, acutely conscious of the inappropriate intimacy of their position. "Thank you." Xavier carried her out of the ravine and across the ridge, his steps sure despite the added burden. Prudence tried to keep her body rigid, maintaining as much separation as possible, but the motion of his walking gradually made such stiffness impossible. Bit by bit, she relaxed against him, her cheek resting against his shoulder as the afternoon waned. They spoke little, conserving energy and water, but the silence between them had transformed from the wary distance of strangers to something companionable and comfortable. When Xavier finally needed to rest, setting her gently on a fallen log, the absence of his warmth left Prudence strangely bereft. "Not much further," he said, offering her the last of the water. "See that line of cottonwoods in the valley? The mission's just beyond." Prudence shaded her eyes against the lowering sun. "Will we reach it by nightfall?" "Just about," Xavier confirmed. "Think you can walk the last stretch? The descent's easier than the climb was." Prudence tested her feet, wincing. "I'll try." Xavier studied her for a moment, then removed his bandana, tearing it in half. "Let me see your feet." She hesitated, then extended her legs, embarrassed by their filthy, bloodied state. Xavier gently removed her ruined boots and wrapped each foot in half a bandana, creating crude but effective bandages. "Better than nothing," he said, helping her stand. With his support, Prudence managed the descent into the valley, each step painful but bearable. As darkness fell, the mission's bell tower came into view, its white adobe walls glowing in the last light of sunset. "By dawn you'll see freedom's light," Xavier said quietly, echoing his words from the auction platform that now seemed a lifetime ago. "I promised you that." Prudence looked at him. This man who had literally carried her to safety, who had killed to protect her, who had shown her more respect and compassion than anyone since her father. The realization that they would soon part ways, that he would deliver her to the mission and then vanish from her life, struck like a physical blow. "Xavier," she began, not knowing what she intended to say, only that something needed to be spoken before they reached civilization and its constraints. He turned to her, his face half shadowed in the twilight, waiting. "I don't know how to thank you," she finally said, the words inadequate for the storm of emotions behind them. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "Just live your life with the freedom and dignity every person deserves. That's thanks enough." The simple nobility of the statement caught in her throat. Before she could respond, a mission bell rang, announcing evening prayers. The sound broke the fragile moment between them, and Xavier gently urged her forward. "Come. They'll have food and medicine." Father Ignacio, a small man with kind eyes and a weathered face, welcomed them without question when Xavier explained they'd been set upon by bandits. The mission's small infirmary had clean bandages and salve for Prudence's feet, and the simple stew offered by the mission's cook, was the most delicious thing she'd tasted in days. They were given separate rooms, small cells furnished with narrow beds and little else. Before they parted for the night, Xavier assured her they would rest for a day, then continue to Santa Fe when she was recovered. Alone in her cell, Prudence lay awake despite her exhaustion, staring at the whitewashed ceiling. Tomorrow they would rest. The day after, they would journey to Santa Fe. And then Xavier would deliver her to his friends, ensure she had passage east, and disappear back into the vast wilderness of the frontier. The thought left an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Somehow, in the space of 5 days, this quiet, honorable man had become more than a rescuer. He had become someone she trusted completely, someone whose presence made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since childhood, someone she might be falling in love with. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it settled in her heart with the rightness of a long-sought answer. But what could come of such feelings? Xavier had made his intentions clear from the beginning. He was repaying a debt of honor, nothing more. Once she was safely delivered east, his obligation would be fulfilled. Morning came with the mission bell's clear tones. Prudence rose, washing with the basin of water provided before donning the simple dress one of the mission women had lent her. Her own garment was beyond salvation after their mountain flight. She found Xavier in the mission courtyard, deep in conversation with Father Ignacio. He looked different this morning, clean-shaven, his hair damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt that the priest must have provided. Without trail, dust, and vigilance shadowing his features, he appeared younger, the hard lines of his face softened. He turned as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes, appreciation, perhaps, or surprise at her transformed appearance. Then his expression returned to its usual careful neutrality. "How are your feet?" he asked. "Much improved," she replied, though in truth they still throbbed with every step. Father Ignacio was most kind. He says there's a supply wagon heading to Santa Fe tomorrow. We can ride with it rather than walking. The news should have been welcome, an easier journey, a faster arrival at their destination. Instead, Prudence felt a twist of disappointment. Their time together was shortening with every development. They spent the day resting at the mission. Xavier disappeared for several hours, returning with their horses, which he'd somehow tracked and recovered from the bounty hunter's camp. The familiarity of her paint mare brought Prudence unexpected comfort, a thread of continuity in her upended life. That evening, as sunset painted the mission walls golden, Prudence found Xavier sitting alone on a bench in the small orchard. He looked up as she approached, something vulnerable crossing his features before he masked it. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded, moving slightly to make room. They sat in silence for a time, watching the light fade from the sky. "What will you do after Santa Fe?" Prudence finally asked. "After I'm settled." Xavier plucked a blade of grass, rolling it between his fingers. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Will you continue tracking? Finding lost people, perhaps." He glanced at her. "Why do you ask?" Prudence gathered her courage. "Because I've been thinking about my own future, about what awaits me in Philadelphia." "Your aunt will help you establish yourself," Xavier said. "Thomas and Rachel have connections. They'll write letters of introduction." "Yes, I'm sure they will." She took a deep breath. "But what if I don't want to go to Philadelphia?" Xavier went very still. "What do you mean?" "These past days have shown me something," Prudence said carefully. "I'm stronger than I knew, more capable. The life that awaited me in Lordsburg, marriage to some shopkeeper or rancher, children, a small circle of familiar faces, that life is gone. But perhaps that's not a tragedy. What life do you want instead?" She met his gaze directly. "One with purpose. One where I'm not defined solely by whose daughter or wife I am." She hesitated. Perhaps. One that includes using what I've learned from this journey. Xavier's brow furrowed. I'm not sure I understand. You help people, Xavier. You find them, protect them, guide them through difficult country. Prudence's heart pounded, but she pressed on. What if I wanted to do something similar? Not the tracking or the fighting, perhaps, but helping those who need guidance to a new life. Surprise and something like admiration crossed Xavier's face. You're serious. Completely. She twisted her hands in her lap. In Santa Fe, you said your friends help people start fresh. Perhaps they could use another pair of hands, someone who understands firsthand what it means to lose everything and begin again. Xavier studied her for a long moment. It wouldn't be an easy life, he said finally. The frontier is harsh on women alone. I wouldn't be alone, Prudence said softly. Not if I had friends, people I could trust. She gathered her remaining courage. People like you. The words hung between them, their implications impossible to miss. Xavier's expression changed, caution giving way to something more complex, hope mingled with uncertainty. Prudence, he began, then stopped, struggling for words. What you're suggesting? I'm not a settler. I don't have a home or land to offer. I'm not asking for those things, she said. I'm asking if there might be a place for me in the life you've chosen, not as a burden or an obligation, but as, she faltered. As what? Xavier asked, his voice low and intense. As a partner, she whispered. In whatever capacity that might mean. Xavier stood abruptly, pacing a few steps away before turning back to her. You don't know what you're saying. You've been through a trauma. Your feelings are my own, Prudence interrupted, rising to face him. Yes, I've experienced terrible things. Yes, my world has been upended, but that doesn't make me incapable of knowing my own mind or heart. And what does your heart tell you? Xavier asked, something vulnerable in his expression. Prudence took a step closer to him. That in the midst of the worst days of my life, I found someone extraordinary, someone honorable and brave and kind, someone who sees me, truly sees me, not as property or a damsel to be rescued, but as a person of worth. Another step closer. Someone I don't want to lose. Xavier remained motionless, conflict evident in every line of his body. Prudence, I'm not the hero you think I am. I've done things, I know, she said simply. I've seen you kill to protect me. I know there are shadows in your past. I'm not asking for perfection, Xavier. I'm asking if there's a chance for something real between us. His hands came up to frame her face, tentative as though she might shatter at his touch. Something real, he repeated softly. Yes, there's a chance. More than a chance. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. From the moment I saw you on that auction block, something in me recognized something in you. I told myself it was just conscience, just doing what was right. But it's been more than that from the beginning. Prudence's heart soared at the admission. Then why fight it? Because you deserve better than a drifter with blood on his hands, Xavier said, pain threading his voice. You deserve a home, security, a man who can give you the life you were meant to have. You gave me life itself, Prudence countered fiercely. You gave me freedom when others would have taken it forever. Don't tell me what I deserve, show me what's possible. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended in that moment of possibility. Then Xavier leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that held both question and promise. Prudence answered by winding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a long, treacherous journey. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. I'm not sure I know how to be what you need, he admitted quietly. Neither do I, Prudence confessed with a small laugh, but I'd like to discover it together. Xavier smiled, a full, unguarded smile that transformed his face. Together, he agreed. We'll start in Santa Fe and see where the trail leads." They returned to the mission hand in hand, their path illuminated by stars overhead and the lanterns of the courtyard ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. But for tonight, it was enough to know that what had begun as a rescue had blossomed into something neither could have anticipated: a chance at a shared future, freely chosen. Dawn broke clear and golden over the mission as Prudence stood in the courtyard, watching the supply wagon being loaded. Xavier was helping the driver secure crates of produce and medicines, his movements efficient and purposeful. In the morning light, with his hat pushed back and sleeves rolled up, he looked younger, almost carefree. Father Ignacio appeared beside her, his weathered face creased in a gentle smile. "Your young man works hard," he observed. Prudence felt her cheeks warm. "He does everything with full commitment. A rare quality," the priest noted, "as is the courage to begin anew." He studied her face. "Xavier tells me you're considering staying in Santa Fe rather than continuing east." "Yes," Prudence confirmed, "if there's useful work for me there." "There is always work for willing hands and compassionate hearts," Father Ignacio said, "especially in these territories where too many see only opportunity for exploitation, not service." He patted her hand. "I have known Xavier Prescott for several years. He has carried many burdens, not all of his own making. It gladdens my heart to see him find someone who lightens those burdens rather than adding to them." Before Prudence could respond, Xavier approached, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Wagon's ready when you are," he told her. "It's not the most comfortable transportation, but it'll get us to Santa Fe by tomorrow evening." Father Ignacio blessed them both before they departed, pressing a small wooden cross into Prudence's hand. "For protection on your journey," he said with a knowing smile that suggested he meant more than just the road to Santa Fe. The wagon was indeed uncomfortable, a simple farm vehicle with a plank bench up front and goods piled in the back. But after their mountain ordeal, even this rough conveyance felt luxurious to Prudence. She sat close to Xavier on the bench, their shoulders touching, while the driver, an elderly Mexican man named Esteban, kept up a steady stream of Spanish conversation that Xavier occasionally translated for her benefit. As the miles rolled by, the landscape gradually changed from the pine-covered mountains to more open country. They passed small settlements and isolated homesteads, crossed shallow rivers and dry arroyos. Everywhere, the vastness of the territory impressed itself upon Prudence, so different from the close confines of Lordsburg or the imagined density of eastern cities. "Tell me about Santa Fe," she requested as they stopped to rest the horses at midday. "What is it like?" Xavier considered while passing her a strip of jerky from their provisions. "It's unlike any other place I've known," he said finally. "Part Spanish, part Mexican, part American, with influences from the native peoples as well. Adobe buildings instead of wood, plazas instead of town squares." He smiled slightly. "The food is different, spicier. The language is a mixture. Even the law works differently there. Will I be welcome?" The question revealed her deeper uncertainty. "A woman alone, without family or connections," Xavier's expression softened. "You won't be alone. And Santa Fe has always made room for outsiders who respect its ways." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Thomas and Rachel will help you find your place, and I—" He hesitated. "And you?" Prudence prompted. "I'll be there," he said simply. "For as long as you want me to be." The promise, understated but sincere, warmed her more than the midday sun. When they resumed their journey, Prudence found herself watching the horizon with anticipation rather than trepidation. They camped that night beside a small stream, the wagon providing some shelter as a cool breeze swept down from the mountains. Esteban proved to be an excellent camp cook, preparing a simple but flavorful stew over their fire that he shared generously. After dinner, he retired to sleep in the wagon, tactfully giving Xavier and Prudence some privacy. They sat side by side before the dying fire, the night sounds of the wilderness surrounding them. Prudence found herself remembering their first night away from Lordsburg, how terrified and uncertain she had been. Now, the wilderness felt almost welcoming, and the man beside her had transformed from threatening stranger to cherished companion. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how much has changed in so little time," she admitted. "A week ago, I was a shopkeeper's daughter with predictable prospects. Now I'm—" She gestured vaguely at the vast darkness around them. "Now I'm here, heading toward a city I've never seen, with a man I barely know yet somehow trust completely." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" "No," she said firmly. "Not for a moment. I regret the circumstances, my father's death, the corruption that allowed what happened in Lordsburg. But this journey—" She turned to face him fully. "This journey has shown me my own strength. How could I regret that?" Xavier's smile was soft in the firelight. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gentle touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "You are extraordinary, Prudence Everton," he said quietly. She leaned into his touch. "As are you, Xavier Prescott." When he kissed her this time, it was deeper than their first embrace at the mission, more certain, more thorough. His hand slid into her hair, cradling her head as though she were precious beyond measure. Prudence pressed closer, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to him as the world seemed to spin around them. They broke apart only when Esteban cleared his throat discreetly from the wagon. Xavier rested his forehead against hers, a soft laugh escaping him. "We should rest," he murmured. "Long day tomorrow." Prudence nodded, reluctantly drawing back. "Good night, Xavier." "Good night, Prudence." He brushed his lips against her forehead before helping her arrange her bedroll near the fire. She fell asleep watching him take the first watch, his silhouette against the starry sky now a symbol of safety rather than uncertainty. Morning brought them to more populated country, the wagon joining a steady stream of travelers heading toward Santa Fe. By late afternoon, the city itself came into view, a sprawling collection of low adobe buildings nestled against distant mountains, so different from the wooden structures of Lordsburg that it might have been another world entirely. "It's beautiful," Prudence breathed as they approached. Xavier nodded, his expression softening as he gazed at the city. "In its way." They entered through narrow streets crowded with people of all descriptions, Mexican farmers bringing goods to market, native women selling pottery and textiles, American businessmen in Eastern suits, cavalry officers on leave, miners and cowboys and families. The cacophony of languages, Spanish, English, native dialects, even French, created a background hum unlike anything Prudence had experienced. Esteban guided the wagon to a central plaza, where he would deliver his goods to various merchants. He bid them farewell with warm smiles and rapid Spanish that made Xavier laugh before responding in kind. "What did he say?" Prudence asked as they collected their few belongings. Xavier looked slightly embarrassed. "He said we make a handsome couple, and he expects to be invited to the wedding." Prudence felt heat rise to her cheeks but couldn't suppress a smile. Presumptuous of him. "Very." Xavier's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Come, Thomas and Rachel's hotel is this way." The Grand Plaza Hotel stood 3 stories tall on one corner of the plaza, its adobe walls painted white, its wooden doors and window frames a bright turquoise blue. Inside, the lobby was cool and dim after the bright sunshine, furnished with a mixture of Spanish colonial pieces and American practical items. Behind the front desk, a tall man with iron gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard looked up as they entered. Recognition followed by genuine pleasure transformed his serious expression. "Xavier Prescott, as I live and breathe," he exclaimed, coming around the desk to clasp Xavier's hand warmly. "It's been, 2 years?" "Closer to 3, Thomas," Xavier replied with evident affection. "You're looking well. Can't complain." Thomas Wilson turned his attention to Prudence, keen intelligence in his gray eyes. "And who might this young lady be?" Xavier performed the introductions formally. "Thomas Wilson, may I present Miss Prudence Everton of Lordsburg." "Prudence, this is Colonel Thomas Wilson, formerly of the Union Army, now proprietor of the finest hotel in the New Mexico Territory." "Former Colonel," Thomas corrected with a smile, bowing slightly over Prudence's hand. "The war's been over nearly 20 years, thank God." "Welcome to Santa Fe, Miss Everton." Before Prudence could respond, a woman's voice called from the staircase. "Xavier, is that really you?" A handsome woman in her 40s descended the stairs, her practical dress and sensible shoes belying the warmth and animation in her expression. Rachel Wilson had the look of someone who had once been a great beauty and had exchanged it willingly for the more enduring qualities of intelligence and character. She embraced Xavier without hesitation, then turned curious eyes to Prudence. "And who have you brought us?" Xavier explained Prudence's situation in simple terms: orphaned, threatened with illegal servitude, rescued and brought to Santa Fe for a fresh start. He omitted the bounty hunters and gunfights, Prudence noted, but conveyed enough that the Wilsons exchanged knowing glances. "My dear girl," Rachel said, taking Prudence's hands in her own. "What a terrible ordeal. You must be exhausted. Let me show you to a room where you can rest and refresh yourself. Then we'll talk about what comes next." The room Rachel led her to was small but immaculate, with whitewashed walls, a narrow bed with a colorful woven blanket, and a window overlooking the plaza. A pitcher of water and a basin stood ready on a washstand, and a simple cotton nightgown had been laid across the bed. "The bathroom is at the end of the hall," Rachel explained. "Hot water is available until 9 in the evening. I'll have some supper sent up if you're too tired to join us in the dining room." "Thank you, but I'd like to join you if that's acceptable," Prudence said. "I've imposed enough already." Rachel's eyes were kind but shrewd. "You haven't imposed at all. Xavier's letter arrived 2 days ago explaining he was bringing someone who needed our help. We're glad to provide it." Prudence blinked in surprise. "His letter? But how?" "He sent a rider from the mission," Rachel explained. Xavier has always been thorough in his planning. The revelation that Xavier had been making arrangements for her even while they were at the mission touched Prudence deeply. He had taken every precaution to ensure her safety and comfort. "He's a good man," she said softly. Rachel studied her face, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Yes, he is, one of the best I've known despite the hard path he's walked." She patted Prudence's hand. "Take your time settling in. Supper is at 7. Left alone, Prudence took full advantage of the washing facilities, scrubbing away the dust of travel and changing into the clean dress Rachel had provided. It was a simple garment but well made, and though slightly large, it was the first proper clothing she'd worn since leaving Lordsburg. When she descended to the dining room at 7, she found the Wilsons and Xavier already seated at a private table in the corner. Xavier rose as she approached, his eyes warming appreciatively as he took in her transformed appearance. "You look rested," he said simply, holding her chair. The meal that followed was the most pleasant Prudence had experienced in weeks. Thomas proved to be a fascinating conversationalist, full of stories about the hotel and the changing face of Santa Fe. Rachel was equally engaging, asking thoughtful questions about Prudence's education and interests without prying into painful memories. Throughout the meal, Prudence was acutely aware of Xavier beside her, his occasional glances, the brief touches of their hands when passing dishes, the way he included her in conversations as though her opinions were valuable and worth hearing. After dessert, a delicious apple tart with cinnamon Thomas cleared his throat. "Now, Miss Everton, let's discuss your situation. Xavier tells me you're considering remaining in Santa Fe rather than continuing east." "Yes," Prudence confirmed, "if there's useful work for me here." Thomas and Rachel exchanged a glance that suggested a private communication beyond words. "As it happens," Rachel said carefully, "we find ourselves in need of assistance. The hotel has been growing, and managing the books, correspondence, and guest relations has become too much for the two of us." "Rachel teaches at the girls' school 3 days a week," Thomas explained. "We've been considering hiring someone with education and good sense to help with the hotel's administration." Prudence straightened in her chair. "Are you offering me a position?" "We're suggesting a trial arrangement," Rachel clarified. "Room and board plus a small salary to start. If it suits all parties after a month, we can discuss more permanent terms." It was more than Prudence had dared hope for, not charity, but genuine employment with the possibility of independence. "I accept," she said immediately, "and I promise to work hard to justify your trust." "Excellent," Thomas said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "You can start tomorrow with learning our booking system." As the evening concluded, Xavier walked Prudence to her room, lingering in the hallway outside her door. In the soft lamplight, his expression was difficult to read. "Are you pleased with the arrangement?" he asked quietly. "Very," she assured him. "The Wilsons are kind people, and the work sounds interesting and worthwhile." Xavier nodded, seeming relieved. "They're good friends. They'll treat you fairly." A question that had been nagging at Prudence finally found voice. "And what about you? Will you be staying in Santa Fe?" His hesitation told her everything she needed to know even before he spoke. "I have business in Tucson, a client who hired me to find his daughter before all this happened." "I see." Prudence fought to keep disappointment from her voice. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow." Xavier's hand came up to touch her cheek gently. "But I'll return, Prudence, in 3 weeks, a month at most, if—" He paused. "If you still want me to, I will," she said without hesitation. "I do." Xavier's smile held both relief and something like wonder. "Then I'll return as swiftly as I can." He leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Prudence." "Good night, Xavier." She watched him walk away down the hall, her heart both heavy with imminent separation and light with the promise of return. The next morning, Xavier departed at dawn. Prudence rose early to see him off, standing in the hotel courtyard as he checked his saddlebags one last time. "Be careful," she said, hating how inadequate the words sounded. Xavier looked up, his expression softening as he moved to stand before her. "Always am." "Liar," she countered with a small smile. "You rode into a corrupt town and outbid a cattle baron for a woman you'd never met. That's not careful." "Fair point." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, pressing it into her hand. "I want you to have this, for while I'm gone." Prudence opened her palm to find a silver coin, worn smooth by handling and pierced to allow a leather cord through it. "What is it?" "Spanish dollar," Xavier explained. "My father gave it to me before I joined the cavalry. Said as long as I carried it, I'd find my way home." He closed her fingers around it. "Now it's yours." The gesture, with all its implications of connection and return, brought tears to Prudence's eyes. "Thank you." Xavier brushed a thumb across her cheekbone. "I'll come back to you, Prudence Everton. You have my word." Then he kissed her, not the gentle good-night kiss of the previous evening, but something deeper, a promise sealed with the press of his lips against hers, his hand warm against the small of her back as he drew her close. When they parted, Prudence's heart was pounding, and Xavier's blue eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. "1 month," he said, his voice rough. "Not a day longer." She watched him ride away, the coin warm in her palm, until he disappeared around a corner of the plaza. True to Rachel's word, Prudence began learning the hotel's systems that very day. The work was detailed but interesting, managing reservations, corresponding with potential guests, overseeing the cleaning staff, and keeping the books balanced. Rachel proved to be a patient teacher, and Thomas an appreciative employer who valued thoroughness and honesty above all. Days settled into a comfortable routine. Prudence woke early, breakfasted with the Wilsons, then worked until mid-afternoon. The remainder of each day was her own to explore Santa Fe, improve her rudimentary Spanish with the hotel's Mexican staff, or assist Rachel with her teaching duties at the girls' school. In the evenings, after the hotel's daily business was concluded, the three often sat in the small private parlor behind the reception area, discussing books or current events. Thomas had subscriptions to newspapers from as far away as Chicago and New York, and he encouraged Prudence to read them to improve her understanding of the wider world. "Knowledge is the one possession no one can take from you," he told her one evening. "Not bandits, not corrupt officials, not even time itself." As April turned to May, Prudence found herself increasingly at home in Santa Fe. The city's blend of cultures fascinated her, so different from the rigid segregation she'd known in Lordsburg. Here, Spanish Catholic traditions existed alongside American commerce and ancient native customs, in a sometimes uneasy but generally functioning harmony. She made friends among the hotel staff and Rachel's students. With her first wages, she purchased fabric to have 2 new dresses made by a local seamstress, simple, practical garments, but her own. The feeling of wearing clothes she had earned through her own labor gave her a satisfaction she'd never experienced when accepting her father's gifts. But beneath her growing contentment ran a constant current of anticipation. Each day brought Xavier's return one day closer. She wore his coin on its leather cord beneath her dresses, touching it sometimes when a task proved challenging or a memory of Lordsburg threatened to overwhelm her. At night, alone in her room, she allowed herself to replay their last moments together, the intensity in his eyes, the gentle strength of his hands, the promise in his kiss. What would it mean when he returned? Would he stay in Santa Fe? Could there be a future for them beyond the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together? 3 weeks after Xavier's departure, a letter arrived, addressed to Prudence in a strong, masculine hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The message was brief but sent her heart soaring. "Prudence found the girl. Reuniting her with her father in Tucson tomorrow. We'll start for Santa Fe immediately after. Expect me within the week, weather permitting. Yours." Just one word, yours, but it confirmed everything she had hoped. Xavier was coming back to her, and he considered himself hers. She showed the letter to Rachel, who smiled knowingly. "He's never signed a letter that way before," the older woman observed. "Not in all the years we've known him." "What do you mean?" Prudence asked. Rachel patted her hand. "Just that Xavier Prescott has always been careful to belong to no one and nothing, until now, it seems." The days that followed were filled with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Prudence found herself paying extra attention to her appearance, wondering what Xavier would think of her transformation from frightened auction victim to confident hotel employee. 6 days after his letter arrived, Prudence was working at the reception desk when the hotel's front door opened, admitting a shaft of bright sunlight and a tall figure in a familiar duster. Xavier stood framed in the doorway, trail dust on his boots, but a light in his eyes that had nothing to do with the sunshine behind him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the lobby, everything else fading into insignificance. Then Prudence was moving, propriety forgotten as she rounded the desk and crossed to him in quick strides. Xavier met her halfway, gathering her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the floor, his face buried in her hair. "You came back," she whispered, arms tight around his neck. "I promised I would," he murmured against her ear. When he set her down, they became aware of Thomas watching from the office doorway, amusement evident in his expression. "Welcome back, Xavier," he said dryly. "I see you've been greeted adequately." Prudence felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Xavier merely grinned, keeping one arm around her waist. "Thomas, good to see you. I trust you've been taking care of Miss Everton." "She's been taking care of us, more like," Thomas replied with genuine approval. "Best addition to the staff in years." Pride swelled in Prudence's chest at the praise. "Mr. Wilson exaggerates," she demurred, "but I've learned a great deal." "I don't doubt it," Xavier said, his eyes warm as they met hers. "You've always been quick to adapt." That evening, after Xavier had bathed and changed into clean clothes, they walked together through the plaza. The May evening was mild, the air scented with blossoms from the gardens that adorned many courtyards. Street vendors were packing away their wares, and musicians played softly near the cathedral steps. "You look different," Xavier observed as they strolled. "More." "More what?" Prudence prompted when he hesitated. "More yourself," he decided, "as though you've settled into your own skin." The assessment pleased her. "I feel different. Working, earning my way, it changes how you see yourself." "And Santa Fe, is it what you hoped?" "Better," she said honestly. "The work is interesting, the people kind. Rachel has been teaching me Spanish, and I've been helping at the school occasionally." She glanced at him. "And you? How was your journey?" Xavier's expression sobered. "Successful." The girl had run away with a miner who promised her wealth and adventure. By the time I found them in a mining camp outside Tucson, he'd abandoned her. She was working in a saloon trying to earn enough to go home. Prudence's heart ached for the unknown girl. "Did her father welcome her back?" "With open arms and tears," Xavier confirmed. "Some stories have happy endings, like ours," Prudence thought but didn't say aloud. Instead, she asked, "Will you take another commission soon?" Xavier was quiet for several steps. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" He guided her to a stone bench near a small garden, sitting beside her with careful space between them despite the privacy the gathering darkness afforded. "On what you want, Prudence," he said directly. "On what you see for your future." Her heart quickened. "I told you before we reached Santa Fe, I want to build something meaningful, to help others as I was helped. With the Wilsons, perhaps," she gathered her courage, "but not only with them." Xavier's eyes searched her face in the fading light. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've had a month to consider what I want," Prudence said steadily. "To make sure what I felt wasn't just gratitude or the heightened emotions of danger." She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "It wasn't. What I feel for you is real, Xavier. And if you feel the same, I don't want to waste more time pretending we're just friends or business associates." Xavier's hand tightened on hers. "I've thought of little else since I left," he admitted. "Of you, of what might be possible between us." He shook his head slightly. "I'm not a wealthy man, Prudence. I have some savings, but no land, no fine house to offer. My work takes me to dangerous places. I'm not asking for wealth or property, she interrupted. I'm asking for you, for the chance to build something together, whatever that might look like. She squeezed his hand. The man I've come to care for isn't defined by possessions, but by his actions and his heart. The declaration hung between them, honest and unadorned. Xavier raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her. "Then I'm yours," he said simply, "for as long as you'll have me." Joy bloomed in Prudence's chest, bright and overwhelming. "And I am yours," she whispered. Xavier drew her closer, one hand coming up to cradle her cheek as he kissed her tenderly at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. In that moment, on a stone bench in a Santa Fe garden with stars appearing overhead, Prudence knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home not in a place, but in a person. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Prudence Everton," he said quietly. "I think I have since I saw you standing on that auction platform, refusing to be broken by what was happening to you." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling both monumental and perfectly natural, "for seeing the person I could be when everyone else saw only a commodity." They returned to the hotel hand in hand, the future spreading before them like an uncharted territory, challenging, perhaps dangerous, but theirs to explore together. 2 days later, Xavier approached Thomas Wilson with a proposition. The hotel was expanding, adding rooms and services as Santa Fe grew. Xavier offered to invest his savings in the business in exchange for a partnership stake not as large as the Wilsons, but enough to provide him and Prudence with security and a home base between his tracking commissions. Thomas, who had been looking for ways to manage the hotel's growth, agreed readily. "You've got a good head for business despite your wandering ways," he told Xavier. "And having you associated with the place will bring in a certain clientele who appreciate discretion and competence." With their future taking shape, Xavier formally asked Prudence to marry him one evening in early June. They sat in the hotel's rooftop garden, the sunset painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I can't promise a conventional life," he said, holding both her hands in his. "There will still be times when I need to leave on commissions. But I can promise to always return, to build our life here together between journeys, and to love you every day I draw breath." Prudence, who had once expected to marry a Lordsburg shopkeeper and live a quiet, predictable life, found this vision of a shared adventure infinitely more appealing. "Yes," she said, joy making her voice tremble slightly. "1,000 times yes." They were married in mid-July in a small ceremony at the hotel, Father Ignacio traveling from his mission to perform the service. Rachel stood with Prudence, and Thomas with Xavier. Among the guests were Esteban, the wagon driver, several of Rachel's students who had become Prudence's friends, and even a letter of congratulations from Xavier's sister in Boston, read aloud by Thomas during the celebration that followed. Their wedding night was spent in the hotel's finest suite, transformed by Rachel into a bower of local wildflowers and candles. There, with infinite tenderness and growing passion, Xavier and Prudence discovered each other completely, their bodies joining as their lives had already done. Afterward, as moonlight spilled through the window, Xavier traced lazy patterns on Prudence's bare shoulder, his expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" she asked, nestled against his chest. "About sunset and sunrise," he replied. "About how they sold you at sunset and I promised you freedom by dawn." "You kept that promise," Prudence murmured, pressing a kiss to his chest, directly over his heart. "And found my own freedom in the process," Xavier said softly. I never expected that." In the years that followed, the Prescotts became well-known figures in Santa Fe society. The Grand Plaza Hotel thrived under the joint management of the Wilsons and Prescotts, gaining a reputation as both the most comfortable accommodation in the territory and a safe haven for those seeking new beginnings. Xavier continued his work finding missing persons, but with increased selectivity and always with an eye toward helping those truly in need rather than simply fulfilling commissions for pay. Prudence often traveled with him when the assignments weren't dangerous, her natural empathy and keen observation making her a valuable partner. Together, they established a small foundation that provided assistance to women escaping desperate circumstances, inspired by both Prudence's experience and the memory of Xavier's sister. Through this work, dozens of women found new lives, employment, education, and in some cases, passage to places where they could start fresh. In the autumn of 1885, their first child was born, a daughter they named Alina, after Xavier's mother. She grew into a spirited girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's quick mind, equally at home climbing trees or reading books from the hotel's growing library. 2 years later, William joined the family, named for Prudence's father. Like his sister, he developed a blend of frontier practicality and intellectual curiosity that served him well in the changing territory. By 1890, when New Mexico was moving steadily toward statehood, the Prescotts had built a reputation that stretched beyond Santa Fe. Their hotel had expanded to include a restaurant that served both traditional New Mexican cuisine and dishes from the East that appealed to increasing numbers of tourists. Their foundation had helped establish a women's college that offered practical education in everything from business management to medicine. On the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier and Prudence sat on the roof garden where he had proposed, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Their children were spending the night with the Wilsons, giving the couple a rare evening alone. 10 years, Prudence marveled, her head resting against Xavier's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stood on that auction platform. Other times, it feels like another lifetime entirely." Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple, his arm secure around her waist. "You've come a long way from Lordsburg." "We both have," she said, turning to study his beloved face, older now, with strands of silver at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes, but still handsome in the way of a man who has lived fully and well. "Did you ever imagine when you rode into town that day that your act of conscience would lead to all this?" Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his face as it always had. "Never. I only knew I couldn't ride away and leave you there." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Best decision I ever made." "For both of us," Prudence agreed, leaning in to kiss him properly, a kiss that held the comfort of long familiarity and the enduring spark that had never diminished between them. As darkness fell and stars appeared above Santa Fe, Xavier and Prudence remained on the rooftop, hands clasped, hearts full. From the desperate auction at sunset to the promise of freedom's light at dawn, their journey had led them to a life neither could have imagined, one built on courage, compassion, and a love that had transformed not only their own lives but countless others. And in that moment, under the vast New Mexico sky, they were exactly where they were meant to be, together, free and home.